The great chamber of the Galaxy Council, on the central world of Vela Prime, was a masterpiece of sound-dampening fields and graceful, soaring architecture. Light from 3 suns filtered through crystalline panels, casting shifting colors on the assembled dignitaries of 100 species. In a modest seat at the very edge of the circular floor, Ambassador June of Earth sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the smooth, cool surface of the translation console. Beside him, Advisor Mina tapped a silent rhythm on her data slate, her eyes scanning the room with the calm focus of a scientist observing an experiment. For 30 standard galactic cycles, about 74 Earth years, this had been the routine. Humanity's arrival on the galactic stage had been, by all accounts, underwhelming. They had not burst from their solar system with grand fleets or revolutionary physics. A quiet probe from the exploratory vessel of the Lorian Compact had found them, and the formal first contact protocols had been initiated. The Council, after a brief review, assigned Earth the status of observer species. It was a polite holding zone, a designation for those civilizations that showed potential, but carried too much baggage or too little interest. Today's session was a quarterly review of resource allocations. An insectoid representative from the hive asteroids of Kryx was droning on about mineral rights in a recently stabilized nebula. June listened, his face a polite mask. He knew the Council saw humans as quaint. Their technology was solid, a clever mimicry of established galactic principles. Their biology was frustratingly resilient but unremarkable. Their history, however, was the sticking point. The centuries of war, the political fracturing, the emotional volatility, it was all there in the data packets humanity had willingly provided. To the long-lived, logically oriented species that dominated the Council, it was proof of a deep instability. "The point stands," rumbled Counselor VROX of the Tholkari, interrupting the Kryx delegate. His scaled skin glittered under the lights, and his 4 arms were folded in a gesture of supreme impatience. Why waste sensor arrays on a region with no strategic value? The logic is flawed. His large, amber eyes swept the room, and as they often did, lingered on the human delegation. A faint, dismissive click came from his throat. Sentiment over strategy is a disease of young species. It was a common refrain. The Tholkari were a militaristic, rigidly logical people who prized strength and cold efficiency. They had been among the loudest voices advocating for the most restrictive terms of humanity's observer status. June felt Mina's posture shift slightly beside him, a tiny intake of breath quickly controlled. He gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. Not here. Not now. The session adjourned with a soft chime. As the delegates floated or walked from their platforms, a Lorian envoy, a graceful being with skin like opalescent water, glided over. "Ambassador June, Advisor Mina, I trust the proceedings were informative?" "Always, Envoy Alara," June said, offering a small bow. "The complexity of galactic resource management is fascinating." Alara's large, dark eyes shimmered. "You are very patient. Your submissions on cultural preservation were added to the archive this morning. Some on the Historical Guild found your cinema artifacts to be emotionally jarring, but intriguing." "We are a jarring species," Mina said, her voice even. "We appreciate their consideration." After the pleasantries, they made their way back to the human sector of the diplomatic enclave. It was a small suite of rooms, functional and bare compared to the lavish, biologically tailored environments of other species. The moment the door sealed, the quiet tension in June's shoulders eased by a fraction. He moved to a console, its design purely human, and activated a secure line. On Earth, it was night and soul. The face that appeared on the screen was that of Director Kyung, a woman with sharp eyes and hair streaked with gray. She sat in a room that was all clean lines and soft light, a stark contrast to the organic grandeur of the council chamber. Report, she said simply. The same, June replied, sinking into a chair. Vrox made another comment, linking emotional capacity to strategic weakness. The budget for the cultural exchange program was denied again. They approved our request for additional ecological stabilizers for the Amazon, but only after a long debate about whether a planet that cannot fully control its own biosphere deserves the aid. Mina pulled up a star chart. They are keeping us on a tight leash. Every technology request is scrutinized for developmental mismatch. They are afraid we'll build something unstable. Something emotional. Kyung nodded slowly. And the other observers? The Freen of Altair IV were granted full membership yesterday, Mina said. Their society has had no recorded internal conflict in 10,000 years. They greeted the news with a synchronized chemical release of neutral satisfaction. A faint, wry smile touched Kyung's lips. A model of decorum. And our projects? June leaned forward. Completely off their scanners. The lunar facility is masked as a gravitational study station. The oceanic arrays are logged as seismic monitors. The Council's oversight is thorough, but it is predictable. They look for weapons, for engines, for shield signatures. They do not look for what does not fit their definitions of power. Good, Kyung said. Continue the quiet. Let them see only what they expect to see. A polite, slightly backward, overly feeling species, diligently following the rules of a club that does not want them. Her gaze was steady. The weighing is almost complete, June. Every insult, every dismissal, every patronizing lesson is a data point. Soon we will have enough. The call ended. June looked out the viewport at the dazzling, artificial starscape of Vela Prime's orbital rings. Below, on the planet, the great civilizations of the galaxy schemed and traded and judged. For 30 cycles, humanity had listened. They had absorbed every detail of galactic law, every nuance of diplomatic slight, every unspoken assumption that logic was supreme and emotion was a crutch. Back on Earth, the quiet was not idle. It was a focused, global stillness. In secret laboratories, scientists like Su Hyun and Tae Min worked on problems the Council would never think to assign. In vast underground facilities, engineers like Ji-hun and Yuna assembled components whose purpose was not destruction, but profound alteration. The Terran Secretariat had one primary directive: ensure human survival and sovereignty by any means necessary. If the galaxy's power was based on cold reason, then humanity would find a different kind of strength. Mina brought him a cup of tea, the familiar scent, a tiny piece of home. Do you think they will ever see us as anything but children? She asked quietly, joining him at the viewport. June took the cup, warmth spreading into his hands. No, he said, his voice soft but certain. They have decided what we are. Their logic is closed. To change their minds, we would have to break their understanding of the universe itself. He took a sip, watching a massive Thulkari dreadnought glide silently past the orbital docks, a symbol of brute, unimaginative force. Fortunately, he added, that is exactly what we have been preparing to do. The Grand Convocation was the Galaxy Council's most public event. It was a spectacle of power and unity, broadcast across 1,000 star systems. The vast amphitheater was packed with delegates, their varied forms shimmering in the light of floating orbs. Ambassador June and Advisor Mina sat in their assigned place, a small tier marked for observer species. Far below the central dais, where the senior counselors presided, the air hummed with conversation and the subtle scent of alien perfumes. The Thulkari delegation, led by Counselor Vrox, occupied a position of prominence. Vrox had recently been elevated to the position of Senior Assessor for Developmental Species, a role that gave him direct authority over the observer worlds. His sleek, scaled head turned, his amber eyes scanning the lower tiers before settling on the humans. A slow, deliberate blink, a gesture of supreme disinterest, was his only acknowledgement. The proceedings began. Species were called forward for their annual reviews. The Freen of Altair 4 received praise for their efficient resource management. The aquatic Tellurians of Blue 1 were commended for their peaceful expansion. The language was dry, technical, and utterly devoid of warmth. Success was measured in stability, output, and logical coherence. Then the clerk's voice, amplified and neutral, echoed through the chamber. Item 447, Review of Observer Species. Terra, designated Earth. A soft, dismissive murmur rippled through the crowd. June rose, smoothing the simple fabric of his suit. He walked down the long aisle to the speaker's circle, a pool of light on the chamber floor. He felt the weight of countless alien eyes, few of them friendly, most of them bored. Ambassador June, Counselor Vrox began, not bothering to stand. His voice was a low rumble. The Council has completed its deep cycle assessment of your species' progress. Or, more accurately, its lack thereof. A holographic display bloomed above the dais. It showed edited, grainy footage of Earth's 20th century war's explosions, soldiers, chaotic crowds. The scenes were stripped of context, selected for maximum brutality and confusion. Your history remains a chronicle of irrational conflict, Vrox stated. Driven by ephemeral concepts like honor, faith, and nationalism, June kept his voice level. Counselor, those recordings are from a pivotal period in our social development. They represent challenges we overcame to achieve global unity. Unity through emotional exhaustion is not a foundation, interrupted another counselor. A willowy being from a logic-centric culture called the Vespin. It is a ceasefire. Your cultural submissions further demonstrate this instability. The display switched to a rapid, jarring montage. A fragment of a passionate opera. A burst of abstract expressionist painting. A clip of a comedian delivering a sarcastic monologue. Chaos, noise, a failure to distill experience into pure data. June felt his nails bite into his palms. Art and expression are data, Counselor. They are data on the human condition, on joy, suffering, and the search for meaning. Meaning is a computational error, the Vespin replied coolly. Your philosophy supports this. You celebrate questions that have no answers. You cherish bonds that end in biological decay. This is not sophistication. It is a systemic failure to accept cold reality. The chamber was silent now, the earlier boredom replaced by a keen, almost hungry attention. This was the convocation's unspoken entertainment, the dissection of a lesser species. June saw Mina, her face pale but composed, her fingers flying over her data slate, recording every word. Vrox rose, unfolding to his full, imposing height. The conclusion is inescapable. Humanity's consciousness is fundamentally flawed. Your cognitive processes are clouded by excessive emotional feedback loops. This renders you unfit for self-governance at a galactic scale. You are a risk to yourselves, and by extension, to the orderly systems of this council. He paused, letting the pronouncement hang in the air. Therefore, the council has decreed that Terra will graduate from observer status to a new category, a guided protectorate. For your own good, and for the security of the region, the Thulkari hegemony will assume administrative authority over Earth. A mentor governor will be appointed to oversee your political, technological, and social development. You will learn logic. You will suppress the emotional volatility that hinders you. This is not a negotiation. It is a verdict of compassion. The words landed not as a blow, but as a deep, cold insult that seeped into the bones. Administrative authority, mentor governor, they were polite terms for conquest, for the end of human sovereignty. They were saying humanity was not just weak, but broken. A child that could not be trusted with its own mind. June stood in the circle of light, utterly alone. He looked up at Vrox, at the rows of impassive, curious, or smug alien faces. He thought of Director Kyung, of the quiet engineers in their hidden bases, of the streets of Seoul and Nairobi and Buenos Aires. He thought of the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it all. Compassion, June repeated, his voice surprisingly clear in the vast silence. You wish to erase what we are, to cure us of our humanity itself. It is not a cure, Ambassador, Vrox said, a note of finality in his tone. It is an upgrade. You should be grateful. Many species do not get such a generous offer of guidance. June knew the protocol. He was to protest formally, then request a recess to consult his government. It was a dance, and every step was expected. He took a slow breath. The Galaxy Council, he said, choosing each word with care, has crossed a line. You have moved from assessment to insult, from observation to eradication. You do not seek to guide us. You seek to unmake us. A stir went through the crowd. No one spoke to the council this way. Vrox's neck frills stiffened. Your emotional response only confirms the diagnosis. You have one standard cycle to prepare for the transition fleet's arrival. Your compliance is expected. June gave a single slow nod. He did not look at Vrox again. He turned and walked back up the long aisle. His footsteps echoed. He felt the weight of the galaxy's judgment, cold and absolute. He reached the tier where Mina waited. Her eyes were hard, all softness gone, replaced by a flinty resolve. They left the chamber without a word. Behind them, the convocation continued, moving on to the next item, the fate of Earth already settled in their minds. In their quiet suite, the secure channel was already active. Director Kyung's face was on the screen, her expression like stone. They have declared us mentally unfit, June reported, his voice flat. The Thulkari are to be our guardians. The transition is mandatory. Kyung was silent for a long moment. On the wall behind her, a map of Earth glowed, dotted with countless hidden lights. An insult to the core, she murmured, echoing June's words from the chamber. So be it. The quiet is over. Signal the facilities. Tell Su-Hyun and Tae-min to begin final activation. Tell Ji-hun and Yuna to stand ready. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing through the light years. They have given their verdict, June. Now we will give ours. The silence in the human diplomatic suite was heavy, but it was not a silence of despair. It was the quiet of a vault being sealed, of a final switch being engaged. Advisor Mina worked at her console, her fingers a blur. Data streams, encrypted and routed through 100 benign-looking signals weather satellite pings. Cultural archive updates flowed from Vela Prime toward the distant blue dot of Earth. The message was simple. A single code phrase. The line is crossed. Ambassador June stood by the viewport, watching the orderly traffic of the galaxy's capital. Thulkari dreadnoughts, blocky and imposing, drifted with calm authority. Graceful Lorian solar sailors caught the light. It was a picture of serene, controlled power. He thought of the chaos and beauty of Earth, the roaring crowds at a football match, the silent reverence in an old temple, the messy, passionate arguments in a university hall. Everything they saw as a flaw, everything worth protecting. The final packet is away, Mina said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Kyung confirms. All sites are active. The resonance is primed. June nodded. There was no going back. The Council's decree had been broadcast across the civilized galaxy. Earth was to be a protectorate. Humanity was to be managed. The story was being spun as an act of benevolent intervention. Many species would accept it. It was logical. A chime sounded at their door. It was Envoy Alara, the Lorian. Her opalescent skin seemed dull, her large eyes shaded with what might have been concern, or perhaps just polite discomfort. "Ambassadors," she said, flowing into the room. "I came to express my personal regret at the Council's decision." "Your regret is noted, Envoy," June said, his tone formal. "But not your opposition." Ilara's tendrils wavered. "The political currents are strong. The Tholkari have framed it as a matter of galactic stability. To argue is to side against logic itself." She looked at them, genuinely puzzled. "Why did you not hide those parts of your history? Why show them your art, your conflicts, your passions?" Mina answered, her voice soft. "Because it is who we are. We offered the full record. We thought honesty had value." "Honesty is a variable," Ilara sighed. "You are to be relocated to a holding facility until the transition fleet secures your homeworld. It is for your own safety, they say." June and Mina exchanged a glance. This was expected. Prisoners in all but name. "We request one final session," June said, turning to Ilara. "A formal closing of our observer mission. A matter of protocol and respect." He made the words sound weak, a plea for dignity from a defeated people. Ilara studied him. The human was so still, so accepting. It fit the galaxy's narrative. They were passive, emotional, and ultimately compliant. She felt a flicker of disappointment. Perhaps the Tholkari were right. "I will make the request," she said. "I can promise nothing." The request, however, was swiftly granted. The Council saw value in a spectacle of orderly submission. It would make good broadcasting. A final lesson for other observers. The next day, June and Mina stood again in the great chamber. It was less crowded, but the key players were there. Counselor VROX presided, a picture of smug assurance. The Vespin logic scribe was present to record the surrender. A few other counselors attended out of casual curiosity. The atmosphere was one of a closing file. "Ambassador June," Vrox began, not bothering with formalities. "You have requested this audience to formally accept the Council's guardianship." A wise, if belated, grasp of logic. June stood in the speaker's circle. Mina remained at their tier, a small case at her feet. He looked up, meeting Vrox's gaze. "We are here to conclude our observer mission," June said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. "For 30 cycles, we have listened. We have learned. You measured us in every way your logic deemed important." He paused, and the pause stretched just a second too long. "You measured our engine outputs and found them adequate. You scanned our weapons and found them derivative. You analyzed our biology and found it fragile. You studied our art and called it noise. You dissected our history and labeled it a sickness." Vrox's frills twitched. "We assessed you. You were found wanting. This is not news. You assessed what you understood," June continued, his voice growing firmer. "You have a hammer, counselor, and so every problem looks like a nail. You see the universe as a thing to be controlled, measured, and dominated by force of will and logic. Emotion, to you, is static in the signal, a flaw to be removed." He took a step forward, a small breach of protocol. "But what if it is not static? What if it is the signal?" A murmur, this time of confusion, rippled through the chamber. The Vespin scribe tilted its head. "You never measured our will," June said, his eyes now sweeping across all the assembled aliens. "You never asked what we were doing while we were so quiet. You never considered that our irrational attachment to our own essence might be our greatest strength. You offered to be our guardians. But you are blind in the one eye that matters. You cannot see the heart of a thing. And so you have made a fatal error." Vrox rose, his scales clattering. "This emotional ranting is precisely. It is not a rant," Mina's voice, cool and clear, cut him off from the tier. Every eye turned to her. She knelt and opened the case at her feet. Inside was not a weapon, but a device of crystalline and woven wire, pulsing with a soft internal light. It looked like a piece of abstract art. It is a statement of fact. You declared our consciousness a flaw. We declare your blindness a vulnerability. What is that? Snapped the Vespin scribe, its analytical mind already trying to categorize the object. A key, Mina said. She placed her hands on it. A key tuned to a lock you didn't know existed. On the dais, Vrox gestured to a guard. Seize them. Seize that device. But it was too late. Mina activated the resonator. There was no explosion, no blinding light. Only a low, deep hum that seemed to come from inside the bones of everyone present. The crystalline device glowed brighter, and a complex, shimmering field of light expanded from it, passing harmlessly through walls and bodies simultaneously. On Earth, Director Kyung gave the final order. In lunar bunkers, beneath ocean trenches, in deep Antarctic ice, the Great Filter Network, a planet-sized array of quantum resonance projectors activated. It did not target ships or planets. It targeted a concept. It targeted the pervasive, galaxy-wide field of emotional suppression, the constant, low-level psychic static of pure logic that species like the Thulkari and Vespin not only lived by, but enforced. The resonator in Mina's hands was the focal point, the trigger. It linked the human network's output directly into the heart of the Council. The effect was not immediate violence. It was a sudden, overwhelming shift in perception. For the Vespin scribe, it felt like its meticulously ordered internal data tree burst into bloom with a million conflicting, beautiful sensations. For a nearby Lorian, it was a wave of empathy so sharp it felt like pain, connecting it to the fear and determination in the two humans. For Counselor Vrox, it was a cataclysm got every repressed emotion, every feeling of doubt, pity, fear, or joy that his biology had evolved to suppress for survival and efficiency came roaring to the surface at once. It was a tsunami of raw, undifferentiated feeling. He did not see anger or love. He was consumed by the sheer, terrifying force of having a soul. He gasped, his forearms clutching at his chest, his amber eyes wide with a horror no Thulkari had ever known. A sound escaped him, a wretched, broken sob. He collapsed to his knees, his great body shaking, tears, an alien and forgotten biological function streaming down his scaled face. Chaos, quiet and profound, filled the chamber. Aliens staggered, gripped by sensations they had no name for. The cold, logical certainty that had ruled the Council for millennia cracked like ice under a sudden sun. June looked down at the weeping conqueror, then out at the stunned galaxy. His voice was calm, final. You sought to silence our hearts. Now, he said, you must listen to your own. The quiet was over, and the sound was devastating. The deep hum from the resonator faded, but the silence that followed was completely new. It was not the quiet of order or control. It was the stunned, trembling silence after a fundamental truth has been shattered. Advisor Mina kept her hands on the now dormant device, her knuckles white. She watched, a scientist observing the results of a radical experiment. Across the great chamber, the representatives of galactic power were unmoored. The Vespin logic scribe was curled on the floor, its slender limbs wrapped around itself. It was whispering a stream of numbers, but the numbers were mixed with soft, whimpering sounds, its first encounter with fear and wonder, tangled together. The Lorian envoy, Ilara, stood frozen, her opalescent skin flashing with wild, uncontrolled color. The empathy her species possessed in small measure was now a floodgate thrown open, and she felt the collective emotional shock of the room as a physical blow, a symphony of anguish, confusion. An awakening dot, but the most profound change was in Counselor Vrox, the mighty Tholkari. The advocate of cold logic and strength was on his hands and knees. Great, shuddering breaths racked his frame. The tears that had started now fell freely, cutting tracks through the dust on the polished floor. He was not crying from pain or sadness in a way a human would understand. He was weeping from the sheer, overwhelming presence of feeling. For the first time in his life, his mind was not a clear, cold stream of strategic thought. It was an ocean, storm-tossed and deep, filled with creatures of memory and sensation he never knew existed. He saw, in a flash of brutal clarity, not the logic of his past actions, the conquests, the insults, the dismissals, but the cost of them. He felt the fear of the species he had dominated. He felt the hollow ache of his own pride. The weight of it was crushing. High above, in the orbital docks, the effect spread like a psychic virus through the waiting Tholkari transition fleet. The crews were chosen for their discipline, their perfect emotional suppression. The resonance, broadcast from Earth and focused through Mina's device, washed over them. On the bridge of the command dreadnought, Captain Kythar was reviewing the approach vector to a passive Earth when a wave of profound, meaningless grief enveloped him. He gasped, dropping his data slate. Alarms began to sound, not from enemy fire, but from systemic failures. The ship's control systems were bio-linked, calibrated to the calm, predictable brainwaves of their crews. Now, those brainwaves were chaotic storms of unfamiliar emotion. Navigation consoles flickered. Weapon systems went offline, their targeting protocols confused by the sudden surge of adrenal fear and empathetic confusion in their operators. A helm officer, staring at the image of Earth, a beautiful, fragile marble of blue and white, was suddenly struck not with strategic appreciation, but with a sense of awe so intense it felt like pain. He forgot his orders. Across the fleet, the rigid chain of command dissolved into a cacophony of individual emotional crises. The mighty fleet, the instrument of Earth's pacification, drifted powerless, its warriors incapacitated by the very thing they had come to erase. Back in the council chamber, Ambassador June stepped down from the speaker's circle and walked slowly toward the dais. His footsteps echoed in the strange new quiet. He stopped before the weeping form of Vrox. He did not speak with triumph. His voice was low, meant only for the broken counselor. "You measured our tears as weakness," June said. "You see now they are not. They are pressure valves for the soul. You have had none, and now the pressure has broken you." Vrox looked up, his eyes filled with a terror far greater than the fear of physical death. This was the terror of an infinite, uncharted inner space. "Wah, what have you done?" He managed, his voice a ragged scrape. "We gave you a mirror," June replied. "You called our reflection ugly. Now you must live with your own." He turned to address the room. The other counselors, those from species with some emotional capacity, were reeling but functional. They looked at him with dawning, horrifying understanding. "This is not an attack," June announced, his voice carrying. "It is a revelation. You built a civilization on a lie. A feeling is less real than thinking. That the heart is inferior to the mind. We have simply corrected the frequency." On the view screen at the front of the chamber, which had been displaying the Tholkari fleet's status, the image changed. It now showed Director Kyung, back on Earth. She sat in her simple office in Seoul. There were no grand weapons behind her, no dramatic displays of force. She looked calm and terribly serious. "People of the Galaxy Council," she said. Her voice was translated, but the weight of it was human. "You have witnessed a demonstration. The resonance will fade. Your biological systems will, in time, regain their balance. But the memory of what you felt will not fade." She paused, letting her words sink in. We have no desire to conquer you. How could we rule those who do not understand the most basic element of our being? The protectorate decree is nullified. The observer status is revoked. From this moment, Earth is a sovereign power, and humanity is a teacher. The word hung in the air. Teacher, you have mastered the outer universe. Kang continued. Your physics, your engineering, is magnificent. But you are children in the inner universe. Your ignorance of it has made you cruel. It has made you blind. Your logical decision to erase us was an act of profound emotional stupidity, fear of the unknown disguised as superiority. She leaned forward slightly. The transition fleet is incapacitated. It will remain so until we lower the resonance. They are in no physical danger. They are simply experiencing. When they recover, they will return home. There will be no retaliation, because you now know we possess a defense you cannot logic your way past. It is not a shield. It is a truth. Her gaze seemed to find every single being watching. The new dialogue begins now. It will not be about our submission. It will be about your education. We will teach you of empathy, of art, of the strength in vulnerability, of the logic of the heart. If you refuse to learn, you will remain forever stunted, a galaxy of brilliant minds with silent, starving souls. The choice is yours. The screen went dark. The chamber remained in its new, raw silence. The old order, the quiet, condescending judgment, was gone. In its place was a shocking, uncomfortable, and vibrant new reality. Humanity had not fired a single shot. They had not destroyed a single ship. They had simply opened a door inside every mind present, a door the galaxy had sealed shut millennia ago, and let the storm out. June looked at Mina. She gave a small, tired nod. The device had done its job. Around them, the galaxy was waking up to a feeling it had long forgotten. Humility. And for the first time, the quiet in the room was not humanity's to bear. It belonged to everyone else. The days that followed were not marked by victory parades or declarations of war. They were marked by a slow, painful awakening. The resonance had faded, as Director Kyung promised, but its echo lingered in the bones of the galaxy. The Thulkari fleet, humiliated and confused, was allowed to retreat. Their ships moved slowly, their crews silent, their commanders unable to meet each other's eyes. The story of what happened spread not as a tale of human weaponry, but as a ghost story, a story of a hidden sense. Long atrophied, suddenly screaming to life. On Vela Prime, the council chamber remained open, but the air had changed. The cold, formal light seemed different. Ambassador June and Advisor Mina returned to their seats, not in the lowly observer tier, but at a new table, placed level with the senior counselors. No one had ordered it. The attendants had simply moved it, sensing a shift in gravity. The first session was tense and quiet. Counselor Vrox was absent. In his place sat a younger Thulkari, named Kor, whose scales seemed dull, his posture less rigid. He did not speak. The Vespin logic scribe was present, but it now carried a small, smooth stone in one of its hands, rubbing it slowly. A tactile anchor to a world that was no longer just dot. It was the Lorian envoy Alara who broke the silence. Her colors shifted in a slow, uncertain rhythm. "The council," she began, then stopped. The old words did not fit. "We? Request clarification on the terms of dialogue." June nodded. "There are no terms imposed, only an offer. For 30 cycles, we learned your laws, your technology, your language. Now you must learn ours. The language of emotion is not logical," the Vespin scribe said, its voice softer than before. "It is chaotic. It cannot be codified." Mena leaned forward. "Can't it?" You codify love as a biological imperative for reproduction. That is like calling a symphony a manual for sound wave generation. You see the mechanism and miss the music. We will teach you to hear the music. A new delegate from a gentle plant-like species called the phyta spoke in a whisper of rustling leaves. We felt a longing. When your resonance passed, a longing for something we did not know we had lost. Is this what you live with? Always, always, June said. It is not easy. It is messy and painful, and sometimes overwhelming. It is also the source of everything we have ever created that was beautiful or brave. You called it a flaw. We call it a responsibility. Over the following weeks, the teaching began. It was not done in classrooms, but in the chamber itself. Mina showed them data, not of engines, but of neurobiology. She explained how human emotions were not noise, but a sophisticated parallel processing system, evaluating social and moral variables logic alone could not see. She played music for them, not just simple melodies, but complex pieces full of dissonance and resolution. She explained how the sadness in a minor key could feel like a beautiful ache. A shared understanding of lost. June spoke of history, not as a list of wars and kings, but as a story of collective feeling. He spoke of the global grief after a great disaster that led to unprecedented cooperation. He spoke of the righteous anger that fueled movements for justice. You saw only the conflict, he said. You never saw the healing, or what the conflict was for, a deeper, more complex connection. Some resisted. Old habits of thought were strong, but the memory of the resonance was stronger. It was a personal, undeniable proof that humanity's flaw was a real, powerful force. A force that could disarm an empire without touching a single ship. On Earth, the hidden facilities, now openly acknowledged, shifted their purpose. The Great Filter Network was not just a weapon. It became a tool for careful, precise cultural exchange. Small, curated resonance pulses, infinitely softer than the first, were broadcast with works of art, literature, and music, allowing other species to feel the context, not just analyze it. The Thulkari, once the proudest, struggled the most. Their society was built on emotional suppression. Now they had to build new foundations. Kor, the new delegate, began spending hours with human counselors. He learned to name the strange sensations within him. One day, after viewing a documentary about the rebuilding of a human city after a natural disaster, he felt a tightness in his chest. What is this? He asked, alarmed. June watched the screen, showing humans covered in mud, working together, crying and laughing. That is empathy mixed with admiration. It is a feeling that connects your story to theirs. Kor was silent for a long time. It is inefficient. It consumes focus. It is a different kind of efficiency, Mina said gently. It builds loyalty. It builds trust. It builds things that do not break under pressure. The galaxy's change was not overnight, but a new purpose slowly took root. The Council was no longer just a governing body. It became a place of study. Human ambassadors of understanding, artists, poets, psychologists, and philosophers began arriving on Vela Prime. They did not dictate. They shared. They asked questions. How does that make you feel? Became a common and profoundly important question in the halls of power. One standard cycle, after the grand insult, a ceremony was held. The old Observer Species Charter was formally archived. In its place was a new document, co-written by human and Vespin scribes. It was called the Compact of Integrated Understanding. It recognized emotional intelligence as a valid and essential form of sentience, equal to logical intelligence. Director Kyung appeared via screen for the signing. Her face was calm. You sought to quiet us, she said to the assembled galaxy. Instead, you have given us our voice. And in doing so, you have found your own. The silence is over. Let the conversation begin. That night, June and Mina stood again at their viewport, looking at the stars. The same dreadnoughts and sailors moved outside, but everything was different. Do you think it will last? Mina asked softly. June shook his head. I don't know. They will backslide. They will get scared. It will be hard. But they have felt it now. You cannot unfeel a truth. You can only ignore it. He smiled, a small, tired smile. And we will be here, as a reminder. He thought of Earth, no longer quiet, but humming with a new purpose, not as a conqueror, but as a guide. The galaxy had crossed a line, expecting to find weakness. They had found, instead, a depth they never dreamed existed. And humanity, having weaponized the heart, now faced its greatest task, teaching the galaxy how to use one.